Joe Springsteen, welcome to Acquiring Minds.
Thank you, Will. It's great to be here.
Joe, you bought a business for outdoor cleaning and maintenance of commercial buildings, properties, a business that I commented to you in our pre-call as feeling like a great self-funded searcher business. We're going to hear all about it and about you. Let's begin with a little background on you, please, Joe.
Okay, sure. My name's Joe Springsteen. I'm the owner of Mallard Systems. And, just going back, I grew up in the Tampa suburbs in the 80s. My dad was retired Air Force. My mom was a serial entrepreneur during those years. But since 2013, I've lived in Orlando, 4 grown kids between me and my wife, Audrey, almost empty nesters. And I think I'm vying for the oldest new entrepreneur title at Acquiring Minds. So excited to be here.
You're vying for it, but I don't think you win, Joe.
Uh-oh.
So you are as old as the Super Bowl, as you put it to me.
That's right. It's easy.
Which I had.
Track. Yeah.
Not being a passionate football fan, I had to look up exactly what that is. But
and do some research into Roman numerals, right? So
exactly.
I think that
I was like, I think I know what that means. Yeah.
Plus, there's even math involved, so it's difficult,
Well, so what was it? Well, let's hear a little bit of your kind of recent career history, and then what was it that drove you to want to buy a business during a later chapter of your career?
Okay. Well, recent is, it depends on perspective. So I guess my career arc, I graduated from University of Florida, worked for my mom's real estate brokerage at that time, briefly, ended up going to law school, became a corporate lawyer. So I spent several years, this is 93 to 2004 to give you context. So worked at a law firm in Seoul for some time, a large firm in Atlanta. And then I was recruited based on my overseas experience into General Mills as an international counsel. So spent the next 4 years doing cross-border JVs and asset acquisitions. And then, we had our first child, my first wife, and we were up in Minneapolis dealing with stuff that Florida people were not, accustomed to dealing with. And the wife at the time had family back in St. Pete, so we made a big move. And I was not really super happy about being a corporate attorney as well. So 2004 to 2020, I would call that my commercial real estate phase. I was in St. Pete working for a distressed debt fund, and we were kind of doing acquiring commercial real estate debt and doing workouts and forbearances and foreclosing on some properties. So one of the big ones that I did was it was a multifamily deal. So I had to basically take it over, and that was kind of my first crack at multifamily operations and what all that meant. And then from there, that led into an operations phase. I was running third property management businesses for national firms. And then I guess most recently from 2016 to 2020, I ran Cushman & Wakefield's multifamily platform in Florida. So that encompassed about 18,000 units, 70 properties, across the state of Florida. So it was
and for those who don't know, residential, Cushman & Wakefield, of course, is one of the biggest property managers in the country.
Correct. Yeah. So probably in the top 25 in the nation. I've lost track of the metrics right now. One thing we didn't talk about in our pre-call was that running that property management business was really running a small to medium business. If you can just say, okay, you have 50 properties with an average of 250 units that have $2,000 a month rents, and you multiply that out, that's about $300 million in rental revenue. And then the
Mhm.
property management model is based on charging a percentage on that revenue. So the larger property management companies charge about a 2.5 to 3% fee. So, when you kind of map it out, it's about a, $7 to $10 million business, um, you know, covering that, that size of a portfolio. So I think a lot of that translates into kind of where I ended up.
Yeah, it's a great point. And what about how many people were under you? Is
Yeah.
it also comparable to a $7 to $10 million small business?
I think it is, because we had probably 5 to 10 properties per regional manager. So if you have a 50 property portfolio, that's like 5 to 7 regional managers. Then you have a marketing manager, somebody in ops. You have an accounting group. If you're a smaller company, you have all of that in house, and all that is paid for by the revenue off of the management fee.
Mhm.
And I was privy to the kind of the back end of that in my first operations job, and they were running kind of net profit of 40%. I think that was a extremely well run lean business. I would say most of the property management firms are probably net margins of 10 to 20%.
Wow. In fact, meaning wow to the 40% in a business where
Yeah.
the average is 15-ish. Huh. Great, Joe. And you did that, you said, through 22?
Through 2020.
Through 2020.
That's right.
And what happened then?
Well, in 2020, I invested by 2020, I'd already invested in this biohazard company that a neighbor had. So I was kind of a minority guy, 10%. And then in 2020, I had the opportunity to acquire the rest of the shares in that biohazard company. So
A biohazard company, meaning exactly what? Well, I think I know what that means.
all the gross
But
stuff
spell
that
it
you
out.
can imagine. So it started as a blood cleanup, hoarding cleanup, rat feces cleanup, mold cleanup. I mean, I was in there full hazmat gear, the face mask with the breathers, full PPE, just cleaning
Wow.
alongside of my guys. And the nature of this work a lot of times is you get a call at 2 a.m. and it's something that's terrible that happened, and and you got to come in and clean this
And
unit up,
meaning it's often a crime scene.
or just I guess in my experience, it was more seniors that passed away, and the
I
property
see.
manager calls up. Yeah. But we also did some work for a military installation over in Tampa. So we had a crew driving over, checking in, going to this building that had been evacuated basically because there was just rat feces and infestation and rats. And it's not horrible business, but profitable, I guess, for some people that want to really lever that up. But
Well, that would be the appeal of such a business, right? That you charge premiums, the margins are fantastic because it's a business most normal people want to stay away from. But seriously, I mean that would be the dynamic, right?
Yeah, that was kind of the dynamic. But really, my thesis coming out of the multifamily business was, hey, I can really lever this business into more restoration work, because a lot of the equipment that we were using was similar to the water restoration. If there was damage to a building, and we had to dry the water out and whatnot. So that thesis didn't really work out very well. I did have some confidence that I had time to transition the company from that, biohazard work into some more restoration jobs, because we had a number of long-term contracts for COVID disinfection. So we had a group of office buildings in Orlando and Tampa, and we would go in a couple times a week and fog the interiors of the buildings, a lot of fear of COVID. And, there were a lot of people at that time were just trying to mitigate that risk of spreading COVID. So I had some tailwinds on that. There were some very conservative clients that kept us on, pretty, past the real COVID scare. I'd say the second COVID scare. But I also decided along the way that I just didn't want to invest more money into this business to see where it went. It was just something that, I decided to kind of sell off some assets and run it lean and, get my money out of it. So I ran it extremely lean.
Joe, let me pause you there.
Sure.
We didn't hear why you jumped into this entrepreneurial opportunity. So you're doing well in your corporate job, and you've been corporate the whole time, from attorney to property management business, doing very well there. And then, so why the hard pivot into small business ownership? And I think this is key, because this really underpins, your why, I think, is quite strong.
Yeah. Good question. So my why happened in 2015, where I was pretty much blindsided by my first wife asking for a divorce. So it turned my entire world upside down. We had 3 young kids, big house in a nice neighborhood. I know that we had been spending years and years kind of keeping up with the Joneses. It was a tough period to go through, but I think the outcome of it was that I was able to kind of reassess my own life and what's important to me and how I could continue to support my kids, obviously, but also to kind of, reassess who I am, who my genuine self is, and how I could, I'm older at that point. I'm already, 50, right?
Mm-hmm.
If that had not happened, I probably would have just, stayed in the W-2 world and saved money and eventually retired. But this really gave me an opportunity to kind of step back. I decided right around the time that I took the Cushman job that I was going to start living very lean, rented a small place, saved my money, built up some dry powder over the years, made a couple of good investments, literally flipping a house and a beach condo, both which turned out great. So, by 2019, 2020, I decided to kind of step out of the corporate world and dive right in. And I dove into that biohazard business.
The kind of stepping back that your divorce foisted upon you. What did you see about yourself that kind of had been, I don't know, suppressed maybe is too strong, but you're leading us to believe that, you weren't living your kind of true to yourself. And so was it entrepreneurship specifically that you were kind of, I heard you say keeping up with the Joneses. So you were kind of doing the corporate thing to make sure the salary was big because there was lifestyle creep and, having all the trappings of upper middle class kind of existence. And that wasn't really doing it for your soul.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And, I guess when I think back, even, to the brief period that I worked with my mom, straight out of college, I had a brief stint doing some commercial real estate, sold a golf course with her, made a little chunk of money. I think along the way I was in my mid-20s and I read, as most guys in their mid-20s that are interested in entrepreneurship at that period were reading Rich Dad, Poor Dad, the Kiyosaki books. So I had kind of this framework, like I want, it gave me some context to it that resonated with me. And I think that entrepreneurial drive enabled me to succeed in the W-2 world. So, but it wasn't something that I could, that I'd fully leaned into, until that terrible terrible time. So I wouldn't
Yeah.
wish that on anybody, right? But
Yep.
it also kind of gave me an opportunity to reassess, who I am and where I want to be. And I've got a few years left, so let's go for it.
Okay, now we're jumping back. So this opportunity to do the biohazard business comes along. Your neighbor, at first you're a small piece investor, 10%, and then you go all in by buying him out. This is not the business we're here to talk about. This is a prelude still. But one thing I just do want to double click on before we leave the biohazard story is you had said to me, you used the word naive about getting into that you had naivete going in. And in fact, it didn't go well. So what was your naivete? What was the big lesson or two?
Probably my quest for agency, full agency, overcame my my risk assessment of where this thing could go. So I think I was just at a point where I wanted to do a deal, and it was kind of laid out in front of me, and I thought I could make a good go at it. Naivety in that I don't think I do the research on the things that I should consider when acquiring an SMB. I didn't know about the Harvard, Bible, for lack of a better term. I wasn't introduced to acquiring minds. God, if I had known about you back then, I could have avoided a lot of issues. But I just dove right in.
I haven't had a biohazard, somebody who bought a biohazard business on, which may tell us something. Maybe that's because it's not a good one to buy. Don't know. Go on.
Yeah, I think going in, I had the COVID contracts, and those were going fine. And then I kind of tipped my toe into, Google AdWords and just looking for, leads. And I came up against the service masters and the large, there's some very specific biohazard companies that are just pouring money into ads. So it was kind of a losing battle, trying to go that route. And then I didn't have insurance experience. So I think that was critical. So you just have an environment where a lot of this type of work it goes through kind of a referral from, a large insurance group. So I just pulled back and I said, okay, I'm going to sell off the assets. I set up a home office, and then I just ran for cash flow. I ended up, I had in my head that once I had a 1.5x MOIC, I'm out. So that's what I did. I just, collected my cash, ran a very small business, did a lot of the work myself. It took about 3 years, but I did it, and then I shut it all down.
Did a lot of the work yourself, the cleanup work?
Yeah.
Wow.
With
your guys?
Yeah. I had one person under contract that had all the licensing. So that's very key. But, on the tail end of that, we parted ways. And I was just doing some not unlicensed, but work that did not require licensing. So some hoarding cleanup and, I gutted through it. So.
Wow, Joe, I didn't realize that you basically had been the guy or one of the guys doing the actual work for 3 years.
Sure. Yep.
And yet you wanted to go back to the SMB game after all of this. Your taste for agency was not quenched, even though it meant, God knows what you've seen through those eyes.
I can't even. Yeah.
Yeah. No. Really.
Crazy stuff.
Conversation for cocktails, I guess, or
at the bar. You might not even want to eat dinner after cocktails. So
yeah. Okay. So the desire for agency is still strong, and owning a business is still the way. It's just, let's do it smarter this time is the conclusion.
Let's do it smarter, and also, let's think about what my day-to-day is going to be like, and what type of customers am I going to have, and is it a positive environment or a negative environment. It's just things that I didn't think about. It's like, oh, it's very profitable business and blah, blah, blah. But man, at the end of the day, for me personally, I want to build a sustainable long-term business that I'm happy to be in on a day-to-day basis. So I learned that about myself. So I knew that whatever I was going to jump into next, I was going to enjoy myself on a day-to-day basis and enjoy the people that I work with. And that's one big thing I missed when I was in my kind of multifamily environment. So, fancy blazer and a, nice office and working with institutional clients and, having a very professional team around me. I miss that for sure. Just the intellectual stimulation that goes along with that. So those were thoughts when I kind of jumped back in.
Mm-hmm. Is there anything to tell us about the search phase? There are a couple familiar names there that I'd probably like you to mention.
Yeah, for sure.
So talk us through a couple of the little bullet points of your search.
Sure. I think I spun my wheels for about a year. I'd call that the Cody Sanchez phase, which I love watching Cody Sanchez, but it's very non-specific. I joined her little mastermind group. So I was scraping data. So I used BizScout and I scraped a bunch of data in Orlando. I focused on commercial landscapers and pool cleaning companies and pest control. And then, set up a CRM and started doing a mix of cold phone calls, yellow letter campaign. Have you heard of these? It's just
from real estate land.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Just my personal story, just give me a call on my cell phone. I'm not a private equity firm. I'm just looking for a family-owned business. And it's all, that all came from my heart. And it was a genuine story. And I got a lot of reaction from that. I mean, out of probably 5,000 contacts across, those service industries, just in Orlando, I had probably 150 really good phone calls, conversations, meetings, face-to-face. Ended up with
really?
Yeah, absolutely.
So it really works.
I think it works. I think it's all about putting yourself out there and being genuine and having a compelling story that not, I wouldn't say a potential seller, but, an entrepreneur just kind of relates to that. And maybe, my story is different because, hey, I'm an older guy. I've got, older kids and ensconced in Orlando long-term. And I'm concerned about my own legacy, and I think the business owner relates to all that. At the end of the day, it was 15 NDAs, 0 LOIs. A few of the guys I still keep in contact with. But it was all maybe in a few years or maybe in a couple of years, give me a call back. So there was really no urgency for them to sell. And so
the classic story, the classic challenge with a proprietary approach that even if you're skillful enough in your outreach to get people on the phone or to a meeting, they're still not primed to sell necessarily.
Correct.
And so it's that's an enormous challenge in and of itself. So,
but an amazing kind of time period and a number of calls that, I wouldn't trade at all. So there was an inflection point. I'm a little bit dismayed. I've gone through all this process. I'm flipping through, and I think I just heard of your podcast at this point. It's like late, it was like November 2023.
Okay.
And then I heard your podcast with your interview with Sam Rosati. And that was the big 3, little 2.
Yeah.
Which
still use that phrase.
Yeah. But number 1, I had dialed in, right? I was like geography. I was kind of industry agnostic. My number 2 was, a service industry that doesn't require a huge amount of licensing and time period to get it. And then number 3 was, the typical 750 to 1.5 million EBITDA. So also another lesson I learned from the biohazard company was it was way too small. So I was doing some research on SBA debt. I figured I'd find the deal first and then figure out, the financing later. But once I heard Rosati, and he mentioned, I don't think he mentioned SM Bootcamp in particular, but I connected with that conversation so much that I looked him up. I'm like, oh, this guy's in Tampa. Oh, he has an SM Bootcamp. Oh, it's starting next week. So I pick up the phone. I call these guys. I talk to Chandler Reed, sign up, and literally like a week later, I'm in the boot camp at Tampa.
Beautiful. And Sam wasn't even sponsoring. By the way, for the audience, quick aside. So Sam's Big 3, Little 2 concept, probably many people will have heard it or recall it. But for those who haven't, Big 3, Little 2 is the concept that the 3 kind of really big criteria in buying a business is geography, size of business, and industry. And if those are the big 3, and if you are dead set on one of those 3, pretty inflexible, like in your case, you were dead set that it was going to be the Orlando Metro, you need to be willing to compromise on the other 2. So if you are committed to Orlando, that means you might have a target size, but you're probably going to have to be flexible there. Industry preference, but might have to be flexible there. That's the concept. So,
yep.
Back to you.
Correct. Yep.
So you end up at SM Boot.
Yeah. End up at SM Boot. End up there. The speaker list, I'm just trying to take it all in, right? But when I read off the speaker list, they're kind of SMB royalty, I think, or at least a few of these guys are, and women. So there was Eric Pacifici from SMB Law, Bruce Marks from First Bank of the Lakes, Josh Richmond, who started his own Nuco Risk about a year ago, Mike German at Hollywood Partners for Q of E, and then the last speaker was Jackie Hirsch, Crown Pacific, a business broker. And when I saw Jackie speak, and I had to step aside, before she left and just talk to her. And we ended up spending about an hour chatting with each other. And she came out of it just, I'm going to find you a deal. Like, give me a couple months. We're both based in Orlando. So I was extremely fortunate, not only to find Jackie, but for this whole group. And I ended up hiring this entire team as my deal team, set up my little website, my little searcher website with my criteria and my background, a little picture of the family, a little button that you push so you get a 1-page PDF of everything that's on the website. So I just went lockstep with everything that the boot camp was talking about. I used their underwriting tools, and I can't recommend it enough. It just gets you from theoretical kind of the Cody to SM Bootcamp. It's like that transition. So
and one thing that differentiates it is that it's in person. They now also have a virtual offering that they launched. I know they launched it. I don't know how it's going or whatever, but in this time frame, and I think to this day, it's an in-person experience, which is comes with its own value.
Yeah.
And Jackie, I will say Jackie is a friend, and she's an investor in Minds Capital. And I also have been fortunate to get to know her over the last couple of years. And she just has a wonderful entrepreneurial, optimistic spirit about her. So she's just really a joy. Yeah.
Yeah. 100%.
Jackie is going to find you a business.
Yeah.
What does she find you?
Okay. So that was November 23. Then we're in, I think it was early March of 23. She calls me up. There's this business and it's right about the size and it's, 30, 45 minutes from your house. You should take a look at it. So it was a materials solutions company. It was kind of interesting. And they basically they provided or they set up kind of the back of house warehouses in Universal Studios and the magic place that I'm not allowed to mention because I have a contract with them. But they would set up these warehouses specifically for all the uniforms and costumes that the employees would wear. So it was kind of an interesting business. But unfortunately,
they just set it up, and so make sure all the costumes are there and all the props and stuff are just there. They're just in charge of.
It's really and it's like the storage systems for that. Yeah. So they had RFID on all the uniforms and costumes, and you'd kind of walk through a scanner, and then it would check it in, check it out, basically.
Yes. Oh, interesting business.
Interesting business. The financials looked pretty good. And then we went to a couple meetings, and then I looked at the lease terms, and they looked a little bit low for, the size of space that I saw. So I just went online on LoopNet, I think, and just pulled up commercial space, and their rents were about half of market. So I asked for a lease agreement. Oh, it's renewing in a year. Oh, and by the way, the building, a prior seller sold the building to institutional capital. So I'm like, so that just blew the numbers. It just wasn't going to cash flow just on the lease term. We were a little bit down the line on underwriting. So I said, Jackie, I'm just going to take a break. And, I had a little van life van, planned a trip with my wife, and jumped in the van cross country, driving from Orlando to southern Utah to go to some of the national parks. So I'm halfway across the country. Jackie calls me back. Joe, I've got a deal. And it's, there are already 5 bids on it. I just found it. So I literally pulled an LOI together. I already had the LOI form, sent it in, and she set up a phone call with the seller. So I said, okay. And I was in Gallup, New Mexico by myself. And I pulled into the parking lot of a casino on a reservation. And I just sat in the back, and luckily I had like a Starlink on the roof. So I just got onto a Zoom call and talked with the seller. And I mean, it was like magic. Like we just totally clicked, like within 5 minutes. They were both Jackie was on one side, the seller's broker was on the other side. And they both just checked out because we just started talking about his business and, how he's growing the multifamily piece. And he's like, I mean, the first person that he mentioned was my mentor, Cushman & Wakefield, David Bales. I got to call him out. He's an amazing leader. And the next.
So the two of you had somebody in common.
We had a whole list of people in common. Yeah. So his business, he was 70% commercial, 30% residential. The residential piece was kind of roof washing of nice houses and, Windermere, Winter Park, kind of nice areas of Orlando. But the other 70% was kind of split between hospitality and multifamily. And the folks he was talking about were kind of my contemporaries from the multifamily business. So we immediately clicked based on that.
Say more about exactly what the business does. It cleans the exteriors of these buildings?
Yeah. The residential business is a little different. It's focused more on roof washing, soft washing process. So instead of pressure washing tiles and potentially damaging them, this company, Mallard, it's a 35-year-old company, pretty much invented the whole soft wash process in the early 90s. Since then, it's become kind of industry standard across the US and even in parts of Europe. So it's kind of an interesting, too bad you couldn't patent that process back then, but it's
Hmm.
you know it's
It's their claim to fame.
That's interesting. Yeah, it's our claim to fame.
Yeah.
And then the other part was kind of exterior cleaning. So you have large apartment communities, you have multi-story buildings, and it's very important to keep the kind of the exterior building envelope clean,
Mhm.
to kind of avoid future water damage. If you don't clean out a gutter, and you have a lot of buildup, or on a TPO roof, you'll get basically OG, organic growth, that gets infused into the stucco or whatever the siding is, or even into the roof structure, and it causes damage. So it goes from kind of a OPEX, just daily or kind of quarterly or yearly or twice yearly maintenance, to CapEx, actually fixing stuff. So
Yeah.
yeah,
And it sounds like it's somewhat essential to the building.
absolutely. Well, and that's really the education. It's very much a consultative sales business on the B2B side. So it's really education and making the regional maintenance director or the asset manager, or whoever is kind of stroking the checks, that you should have a line item in your budget for exterior cleaning, in order to avoid a full repaint. It can extend the life of a paint job that might cost $500,000 or $2 million or $4 million, or replacing parts of the roof structure, which could be a lot more expensive as well. So
Gotcha. So many of your target customers perceive it as discretionary, and part of your sales process is convincing them that it's, if not essential, ROI positive, because it prevents all kinds of additional costs later.
that's it.
And Joe, I would think that a business like so I don't know how technical these cleaning processes are, but I would imagine not so technical, especially if a lot of it is pressure washing. It would seem like that this is a low moat, low margin, frankly difficult business. Is it?
It would seem that way, but when you're dealing with a certain level of client, they have insurance requirements, for GL, for umbrella insurance, even for per truck insurance. You have pretty much every apartment owner goes through a compliance process. So if you don't have a certificate of insurance that's up to date with all the minimums that are in your contract to do a job, then you can't do that job. So I think the moat is really doing this type of work the way it should be done, and covering yourself the way you should be covered.
Mm-hmm.
And then there is some expertise as well, because we do a lot of lift work. So we have these 66-foot, 86-foot plus lifts that our guys are operating. They need to be certified to operate them, move them around the properties, and they're taking hoses up and, cleaning buildings, cleaning windows. And then we're also rappelling off the side of buildings, to get to hard to get spots. And that takes certifications as well. So I think all of those are more or less moats for chucking a truck, that's got a pressure washer from Home Depot, So it's a little more involved than that.
I did want to ask you about the chuck and a trucks, because you do find yourself bumping up against them, and having to sell your value prop, because enterprising chuck and a trucks can buy a pressure washer and a truck, and they're in business, sort of thing. So but let's put a pin in that, and come back to it. So window washing is also part of the service offering?
It was part of the service offering, but less of a focus. So that was one of the things that I really pushed into post acquisition, and getting the certifications for the repellers as well.
Okay, Joe. So can you tell us some numbers around the business? We've heard that it's a 35-year-old business. What else can you share?
It's a 35-year-old business, 20, 23 to 26 employees, a couple of subcontractors that I use sometimes, but pretty much everything is in-house. When I underwrote the deal, so that was 2023 numbers, so we're in kind of early 24. We were at about 3.1 to 3.2 million in revenue for 2023. And then I was really looking at kind of the average EBITDA and average SDE over the prior 3 years. So when I came into an offer, my offer was a little aggressive based on those numbers. I came in at about a 4.7x EBITDA and a 3.5x SDE based on the 23 numbers. So, that was like 3.1 or 3.2 million. Then what I kind of looking at the time of LOI, May of 24, I was looking for trends and talking with the seller at the time. He was very open about, providing any report from QuickBooks, that I asked for. So I was able to get a very clear picture of the business. So I was looking at, key kind of top 10 customers and what their revenue looked like per customer. I was looking at his kind of aged ARs, how that looked, his APs, his balance sheet, and he would provide updates whenever I wanted. And what I saw was, he had a big pop in early 24. So when I looked at trailing 12 months versus the kind of full year of 23, he's trending to like 3.8 million in revenue. So, the question I had to ask myself was, okay, is this like a one-time thing, or could I replicate, or could I kind of continue the business at that level? So that was kind of that was a decision I had to make for myself. But, the bankers kind of saw the same thing that I did, when I kind of put my business plan together and talked it over with them. So on trailing 12 to May of 24 at time of LOI, if I backed into an EBITDA number, it was really like 3.2x, not 4.7. And then my SDE was like 2.7x versus 3.5. So, and then on top of that, I just saw a lot of marketing spend that was, 30% of the residential revenue. So my plan was really to move heavily into commercial and to kind of de-emphasize that residential business. So there was some meat on the bone there from, kind of reallocating that marketing.
And was this also a case where you thought you'd be able to lean on your existing Rolodex and turn on new business?
I think that was my thesis in retrospect for both the biohazard company and this one, but it was real for this one because they were already servicing some of the, the contacts that I knew. So also, on the back end, I could call some guys and ask them what they thought of the company. And, these guys are fantastic. Actually, I've been using them for 20 years. That's the reaction I would get. Yeah. So
that was fantastic.
That was a full go ahead for me. Yeah.
So if you were looking at the previous full year's numbers or average of the previous 3 full years, it was a bit of a rich multiple, but they had this surge in revenue, and if you could sustain that, it was actually a fantastic multiple. And spoiler, You have so far sustained it. So, so your purchase price is looking better with every month that goes by. Your effective purchase price is looking better with every month that goes by, which is great.
Sure.
Can you share the deal terms? How you put it together?
Sure. It's the classic, sole owner leverage buyout. So I had no outside investors. I did a 90% SBA 7A. Purchase price, I was not the highest bidder. So that's another aside. I came in at 1.475 million. And the full price offers, there were 5 other offers at 1.5. So my cash in.
And Joe, why do you think you won the deal? Was it the aforementioned chemistry you had with the seller?
100%.
Mm-hmm.
That was it.
And it was just you got and just to dig a little on that chemistry, you guys knew a lot of the same people. You hit it off. Was that was essentially it?
That's essentially it too. I mean, there were some personal things as well that we aligned on. Just dealing with the tough part of aging parents and the ages of his kids were a little older, but we just saw eye to eye on a lot of things.
Yeah. Great. Okay, thank you. So it was a SBA deal, 10% of your 10% down, and no investors.
Correct.
And so that 10% of that is about $150,000. So that was off your own balance sheet. There were some deal costs in there, but out of pocket, you were what? 200 into the whole project?
162.
162.
So when you're working with the SBA, you need to make sure that they will add up the project cost for you. So if you have, 1.5 million, rounded purchase price, then you have, there's an SBA loan fee. You have, legitimate deal costs and due diligence costs that you pay for prior to closing. So I was able to move my legal fees into it, my Q of E cost, and some accounting fees as well, which counted towards my equity. Mm-hmm. And then when you look at project costs, you're looking at the purchase price plus, hopefully working capital. I think that's been discussed a lot in some of your prior podcasts, and something that the bootcamp hammered into me as well. You're going to need working capital because this is going to be a cash flow issue if you don't have any working capital on day one. So I was very focused on that. I had already had experience with the first company, so I needed to make sure that I had enough cash on hand, both within the deal and then reserves on the side as well. So,
reserves on the side, meaning your own balance sheet, personal liquidity,
right? In case things went sideways for a couple months or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
So total project cost on a 1.475 million purchase price was about 1.62 million, and then 10% of that is 162,000.
Mm-hmm. Great. And I don't think we heard the SDE.
Well, my trailing 12 number, kind of my back of the envelope, it was just shy of, it was like 550 to 600. Call it SDE, including paying myself mm-hmm. about, $100K. Mm-hmm. So, that's enough to live on, right?
Yeah. So you getting into the business planned on and are now paying yourself $100,000 as its owner CEO.
Right. And then, as the year progressed and we were able to exceed that, that trailing 12 number, we closed out 25 to like $6,000 shy of $4 million. So yeah, we exceeded that number, and putting together a business plan to just keep growing it. Even at a
So,
conservative kind of like.
so that surge in revenue the business had seen just before your ownership did in fact carry through to your ownership, and in fact, you pushed it up even further. So you got to effectively $4 million in revenue.
Correct.
Fantastic.
And I was able to distribute my initial capital and then some in 1 year.
You're 162 and then some. So you're fully paid back.
Yep.
Wow. Well, that sounds like it's going the way it's supposed to.
It's going all right.
That's great. That's great, Joe. Congratulations.
Thanks.
And is it going the way you want it to, for all the reasons that you kind of hoped? It specifically, is it the business that you thought it was? Have you been able to actually parlay some of your contacts into new business, and whatever other ideas you had?
It's all played out pretty much the way that I'd probably say, if I had below par, or above par, it's definitely above par. I think it was 3 months into my ownership, I went to a little trade show that was put on by the largest property management company in the world. They alone have 75,000 units just in Florida. And I knew the head of their kind of statewide maintenance director from, it's kind of a small incestuous world, multifamily. So I just made a beeline to him. We caught up for a few minutes. A month later, we were named as Greystar's preferred vendor for exterior cleaning in Florida, and that has played through. We've also made one of the big pops from prior to acquisition was this magical amusement park that has magical resorts in it.
That shall remain nameless.
That shall remain nameless because they will chase after me. But we're able to expand our presence there into, I think we're at 8 resorts on property, providing their kind of periodic cleaning. Those are 3-year contracts. So I'm feeling pretty good about our prospects. And
great, Joe. I hear the word contracts, and I failed to ask you this when you were telling us about the business. So is it contractual revenue in general, recurring?
It's a bit of a misnomer. Those 3-year contracts for this particular client, if we did anything terrible, they could cancel us in the space of 7 days. So it's always about, how good was your last job and making sure that you're doing work according to standards. You're really mindful of safety. So it's always continual training, making sure that our guys have the best equipment, the best training that I can buy for them. So I think our success is kind of like a flywheel because, now I have the capital to be able to continue to invest in better equipment. I looked at, for instance, we had a lift costs. I talked about the lifts before. Our monthly rental bill was, I don't know, $15,000 or something like that. So I went out and bought a very specific lift for certain jobs that were difficult, for regular lifts to get into. So that's been kind of a very positive thing. And then it raises our moat a little bit more because, I have a tracked lift that kind of, when you kind of put it all down and compress it together as much as it can, it's a 60-foot lift that can go through kind of a regular doorway. So you have
interesting.
You have these courtyards of multifamily apartments that other, competitors can't get into. And we just get that little lift and go through the gate and expand it and go up 60 feet and do our job. So
interesting. So one gadget, if you will, one vehicle purchase, capex expenditure,
Yeah.
has kind of, as you said, increased your moat, helped the business.
Yep. Absolutely.
Anything else to say about how things are going well? I did want to hear about the competitive landscape, the chucking of trucks, but anything more to say about on the good side of the business that you now own?
I think one thing that enabled kind of a quick, kind of enabled me to step in quickly, was that, I talked about the overlap in my client base, the institutional asset managers, the senior property managers, but being on on that side of it, I had a deep experience just working with general contractors, roofers, restoration guys, building engineers, so yeah, I could wear the blazer in the office, but a lot of the times I was in a t-shirt and just in my work boots and my hard hat and working, just working with guys. So I felt like I stepped into this and I could talk shop immediately, with my team, with the crew supervisor. So it was a day one immediate comfort. Funnily, when the seller introduced me on day one, I literally walked into the shop and Bob, he's like, "Hey, as you might have heard, there's a new buyer or a new owner of the company. Want to introduce you." And I just looked at Bob and I said, "Look, I'm Bob. I'm a few pounds lighter and a couple inches taller." And everybody just, tension broke and everybody felt a little relieved. I said, "I'm not changing stuff. You guys all have your jobs and we're just gonna, build on, what Bob's been doing. Bob the builder has been building for, the last 11 years and we're gonna keep moving." So,
and this is a case of just great business buyer fit. To your point about how at home you felt in this business, was that something that you communicated during your transition speech? Like, "Hey guys, I have experience in this world. I'm not some office jockey."
I mean, not. It was a very limited kind of talk. Because these guys are, they're blue collar, salt of the earth, making 20, $25 an hour. What they're most concerned about is, do I have a job? Am I getting fired? They're more concerned about what's going to happen to themselves. So
yeah,
I wanted to assuage them and let them know that they're all valuable team members and, that I've talked about each of them. And I think I spent the next few days just having one-on-ones with every single person. So that was, I think, having been, kind of in that multifamily business and just working with people that are managing those properties, the maintenance guys and, the turn techs and the assistant managers and the leasing people, that all kind of played into, my comfort in working with the team.
Yeah. I heard you say Bob, what he's been building for the last 11 years. So he was not the founder. He bought the business himself 11 years ago.
That's right.
Or now 12.
So he was the second owner. And I'm the third. So been a private company the whole time.
Joe, you did say to me in the pre-call that I didn't hear much about it, that there was actually some turnover on day two. So it sounds like day one went swimmingly, but then day two maybe less so.
Yeah. So day one, I did have a separate conversation with our kind of key accounts manager.
Okay.
So basically, a very important sales guy. Day two, he walked in the office and tendered his resignation. And I just said, "Look," and we did have a long conversation prior to me talking with, with the team in the shop. And, I said, "Look, I admire, what you guys have built. I'm sorry that, you weren't." He was upset because he didn't know about the sale.
Yeah.
So he felt ownership in the company.
Yeah.
And and I totally empathize with that. And I said, look, I'm going to be here for you, if you change your mind or whatever, but I'll accept your resignation. Best wishes. I'm really sorry to see you go. I think, we could really grow something special. If you change your mind. And I just kind of left it at that. So very nervous time. I think it was in a couple of days, maybe 2 or 3 days. So he gives me a call. He says, hey, just have a conversation. I said, okay, that's fine. So came back in and, I just looking back at what he was making, I thought he was a little bit underpaid. So I said, look, I think you were underpaid for what you do. And, I want to pay you better than market. And I want to make sure that you're happy where you are and that you have all the tools that you need to continue to succeed. So he gave me kind of a number and we went back and forth and that was the end of it. He accepted and we've been working great together ever since then.
Oh, great.
Yeah.
Great. Well, Joe, that
like,
actually, the finesse with which you handled that, I want to tie back in now, your age and your experience that many people in the audience, people who buy small businesses don't have. You have years of experience as a manager. How do you think that has played out or not? Do you think it gives you an advantage? It must.
I think it does because I've really screwed up as a manager a few times in the past. Mm-hmm. I just didn't have the kind of the emotional intelligence at certain, especially kind of my first kind of multifamily ops job working with people. I learned some tough lessons there. And, you make mistakes. I mean, I got fired ultimately from that job, but, you learn and you just have to move on, like if something ends, it might be your fault sometimes.
Yeah.
So you got to learn from that, like your wounds, and then, go after it again. That's the only way I've been able to go the places I am.
The competitive landscape, Joe, and we may have already kind of talked about this, and it sounds like, your recent CapEx investment on this new lift, the quality of service and how important that is, and your reinvestment in quality, in training, in certification, the relationships and contracts, as sort of tenuous as the contracts are, they are relationships and contracts.
Yeah.
I assume all of that is what keeps the chucks in a truck at bay.
The chucks in a truck are really more on the residential side. And yeah, so that's really, that's our roof washing, kind of some exterior cleaning, but primarily roof washing business. That's a classic B2C home service business. It's separate and apart. I mean, I really have two businesses. One is that classic home service business. It's just kind of, it's a good size. It's $1 million of revenue a year, but it just, the burden of just the ad spend, bringing in those leads, and we have great inside salespeople too. I've had to really learn that business, and we'll see what happens with it.
Okay.
I'm not really focused on expanding that piece of it. I think the future is really just growing out the commercial side and expanding our offerings. We do exterior cleaning, but we're specifically doing window washing for, high rises. I think I mentioned that. We do some waterproofing of windows, seal coating, so roof painting. So there are a number of additional services that our clients are already asking for. So they're kind of natural extensions of what we do now, using the same talent, the same equipment. So it's organic growth. I think it's an organic growth plan for us on the commercial side.
And tying again back now to your kind of looking forward, and the fact that you did this in your late 50s, you had mentioned to me that you have something like a plan, 5-year plan, as actually anybody buying a business probably would. But I want to ask how that, if that's different for somebody. This is probably what you'll do before you retire. You'll probably do this up until you're ready to retire. Fair to say?
I would recharacterize that. So
Yeah.
I think my time horizon is forever.
Mhm.
And the 5-year plan is really a 5-year operating plan to budget towards. Because I think, even on an annual basis or a quarterly basis, you need to have a plan that you're shooting for, that
Yeah.
you share with your team, that they get involved in and provide input on how to achieve that plan and the things that they do. I mean, it's exciting. The team is excited that.
And what does your 5-year plan call for, or project for, or aim for?
It's pretty conservative. 10% revenue growth per year. And then just tighten up our operating margin. There's some kind of reallocation of capital, that we could tighten up our margins with. But I think just kind of stepping back, like, I think I have a pretty conservative goal because I want this to be a sustainable company, a sustainable lifestyle, not only for myself, but for the team members involved. So, it's kind of, I think, going back to Sam again and his podcast with Kostab Dio, the intentional owner, they talk a lot about just building kind of sustainability into your life. I'm an avid listener of that podcast, and that's what I believe as well. That I'm very cognizant of my day-to-day, spending time with my wife Audrey, carving out time to have trips or just be with my adult kids when they're in town. I've got my 2 eldest boys have their own entrepreneurial stuff going on, and one of them's in Singapore and the other one's in Sri Lanka, I think. I kind of lose track of that one. But it's important when they're in town, or we can plan trips and be together. That's part of why I'm doing this as well, just to have the wherewithal to create experiences to share with my loved ones.
Joe, how do you reflect now, having been inside and the owner operator of 2 small businesses? How do you compare and contrast this one, and really your own intersection with each of these businesses?
Oh, night and day. I mean, I went from the grind and just daily, just pushing through. That was painful on just a day-to-day basis. Just really managing every dollar and making sure that everything is covered, all the bases are covered, doing everything I had to do, myself. But just learned a lot about running a lean business and cutting the chaff from the wheat, so to say. And that's really that experience enabled me to just jump right in as well and rip through the financials and ask a lot of questions. And I think it's that first experience was really crucial to what we're doing now. So I'm glad I went through that too. Everything in life is an experience, and hopefully you can learn from it and build on it.
You had mentioned to me that you find that have found that your talents are better suited to entrepreneurship through acquisition. And while you did buy that biohazard business, it didn't feel very established. So it ultimately felt more of a story of 0 to 1.
Yeah. 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 I think I realized that I wasn't a startup guy. You know, there are certain breeds of entrepreneurs, I think. You know, I guess there are founders and then there are operators, and I'm definitely in the latter group. I recognize that about myself. I'm also not kind of a natural salesperson, but I do well in kind of long tail consultative sales processes. So um, I think that multifamily experiences has given me, a lot of good experience as well.
Anything else, Joe, about your journey? That any reflections? You're a year and a half in. It's going really well. You've grown revenue to 4 million from, well, I guess 3.8, but that's up from 3.2 not that long ago. You've got a 10% growth per year projection. That'll get you to what, 6 million in 5 years if you hit it?
Something like that. Yeah.
Anything more to add? Anything maybe to say to people who are considering doing this in their mid late 50s or later?
I don't know if I could speak to people in their mid late 50s. I would hope that they were younger than me.
Why?
Well, I would say folks I'm 60 now, but I feel like I'm in my early 40s, and my doctors tells me that my body is like I'm in my early 40s. So I think I have a little more runway than other folks that might be of this age. But I would just like stepping back to, regardless of whether you're kind of in your 40s, 50s, 60s, or you're 25, 35, I think you really need to, if you're going to dive into it, get brutally clear on your kind of big criteria, but kind of that big why. Just spend a lot of time kind of assessing what you're good at, and how your experience, whether it's 2 years, 5 years, 10 or 20 years, transfers to, what you're looking at. For me, my number one was geography. I'm not fucking moving. I've got my life here. I've got my house, my kids, and I've got people here. I'm not going. For other people, it's going to be different. I mean, you're going to be in a different stage of life or maybe you are coming out of the same industry or parallel industry. So your first big criteria is going to be industry, and you're going to be more geographically agnostic. But for me, my family, my community, and kind of a stable life is what I'm after.
And now that you're in this business, Joe, where the business buyer fit is so tight, and you reflect back on that, what did you call it? A materials handling business? The costume asset management business. Do you look back at that and be like, boy, that would have been much harder than I realized, just because what you're in now is so natural to you.
Yeah. There was definitely the aha moment when I was introduced to Mallard Systems. I think, it is a tough market, and you do have, independent sponsors and, some PE dipping their toes into smaller deals that they might want to roll up. I mean, that's probably more an issue with HVAC or electric or, those types of industries. But I think you just have to have you have to establish some connection with what you're going after.
Well, congratulations on the successful pivot in your whole life, and getting through that biohazard crucible. Wow. and emerging on the other side with the gumption to go do it again. And this time it seems to be working very, very well. So congratulations on all of that.
All right.
We will provide a link to your LinkedIn in the show notes. And the business is Mallard Systems.
Yep, mallardsystems.com. And my email is joe@mallardsystems.com. So there you go.
Super. Joe Springsteen, thank you very much for coming on.
Thanks, Will. Appreciate it.
Hope you enjoyed that interview. Don't forget to subscribe to the Acquiring Minds newsletter. We send an email for every episode with an introduction to the interview, a link to the video version on YouTube, and soon, key takeaways, numbers, and more essentials from the interview for those of you who don't have time to listen or watch it. Subscribe at acquiringminds.co. You'll also find all our webinars there on the website, both those we have coming up and recordings of past webinars. At this point, there are over 30 webinar recordings, a wealth of information on all the technical nitty-gritty of buying a business. acquiringminds.co.